Hollywood hasn't stopped talking about it. Rob Reiner's final interview aired, and the world is still reeling. In a rare, intimate conversation, the legendary director and actor opened up like never before, revealing deeply personal truths about his life, his losses, and the struggles behind the scenes that no one ever imagined. Viewers were left speechless, many wiping away tears as Reiner shared moments of heartbreak and hope that shaped the man behind the camera. For decades, Rob Reiner has been celebrated for creating timeless films like When Harry Met Sally, A Few Good Men, and The Princess Bride. But fame, awards, and red carpets have never told the whole story. In this final interview, he spoke candidly about the tragedies that had haunted him, personal deaths, shattered relationships, and battles with grief that he had kept hidden from the public eye. His voice trembled at times, revealing a vulnerability that no Hollywood spotlight had ever captured. Fans described watching the interview as like witnessing a soul bare itself to the world. He spoke of his mother's passing, the sudden death of his brother, and the heartbreaking loss of a close friend whose death he had never disclosed before. Each story was delivered with honesty, humility, and a rawness that left journalists, co-stars, and viewers emotionally stunned, but it wasn't just sorrow he shared. Reiner also spoke about resilience, love, and the power of truth. He revealed how friends like Billy Crystal had been there for him during the darkest times, supporting him quietly when the world demanded a smile. He admitted that speaking out finally had been the most liberating act of his life. By the time the interview ended, cameras were off, but the tears continued. Social media erupted with clips of his heartfelt confessions, with millions expressing gratitude for his courage and humanity. For many, it wasn't just an interview, it was a profound lesson in strength, vulnerability, and the price of silence. The question on everyone's lips now: did Rob Reiner just reveal everything? Or is there more to the story that even Hollywood wasn't ready to hear? The studio lights were harsh, but Rob Reiner hardly noticed them. He sat across from the interviewer, a stack of papers and a single glass of water in front of him, but his attention was elsewhere, on memories that refused to stay buried. This was the interview he had delayed for decades, the one he had promised himself he would never do. Yet now, at this moment, it was unavoidable. The world knew about the tragedies surrounding his life, thanks to Billy Crystal's revelation, but few could comprehend the depth of the pain behind each public headline. Today, Rob would speak for himself, and he knew the room would never forget it. He cleared his throat and began slowly, his voice trembling just enough to betray the storm inside him. "I've spent most of my life making people laugh or cry on screen or feel something they couldn't elsewhere," he said. "But no film, no role, no camera could ever hide the grief I carried in private." His eyes glistened under the studio lights, reflecting decades of sorrow. The interviewer nodded silently, sensing that every word was precious, a fragment of truth that had long been withheld. Rob's first confession was of his mother Estelle. Her death, though natural, had left a hole he could never fill. "I blamed myself for not visiting enough, for being distracted by work, by scripts, by awards," he admitted, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "I thought I could outrun the grief, but it followed me like a shadow." The cameras captured every nuance, the slight tremor of his voice, the occasional blink as tears threatened to fall. No editing could soften the rawness of that moment. He moved next to the sudden death of his younger brother, Lucas. The loss had been violent, shocking, and entirely unforeseen. "I still hear the phone call in my head," Rob said softly. "The news came too fast and I felt powerless." It was a pain that made every triumph meaningless. The weight of those words hung in the room, unspoken yet palpable. Even the crew behind the cameras felt it, the hush of empathy that comes when someone reveals their soul in a room full of strangers. Then, he spoke of the friend whose death he had never publicly acknowledged, a collaborator, a confidant, someone integral to his personal and professional life. Rob had kept the story secret for years, fearing scrutiny, gossip, and judgment. "I thought silence would protect us," he admitted, voice cracking. "Instead, it buried me alive." He paused, swallowed hard, and looked directly into the camera. "I can't do that anymore." As he continued, Rob shifted the narrative toward hope and resilience. He spoke of Billy Crystal, his lifelong friend who had intervened at the moment Rob was most vulnerable. "Billy reminded me that sharing pain isn't weakness," he said, voice steadier now. It's the only way to heal. He described nights of long conversations, laughter in the darkest moments, and the simple comfort of knowing someone understood without judgment. Rob's final words were delivered with a quiet strength. Grief is inevitable, he said, but silence isn't mandatory. If my story can help even one person understand that or survive, then every tear I've shed and every loss I've endured has purpose. The interviewer, the crew, and anyone watching would later describe the ending as heart-wrenching. A man who had given the world so much laughter, insight, and art, now giving something even more profound truth. When the cameras cut, Rob leaned back, eyes closed, feeling the release of decades. The grief didn't vanish, it never would, but speaking it aloud had lifted a weight he didn't know he could bear. Outside, the world waited, hungry for reaction. But inside that studio, Rob Reiner felt something he hadn't felt in years. The fragile, enduring peace that comes from finally being heard. The moment the interview aired, the world reacted almost immediately. Social media erupted with clips of Rob Reiner's trembling voice, his glistening eyes, and the raw, unfiltered emotion that television rarely captured. Fans flooded Twitter and Instagram, posting screenshots, quotes, and tearful reactions. "I didn't realize he carried so much pain," one user wrote. "I've never seen a Hollywood legend this vulnerable." News outlets scrambled to cover every angle, dissecting his words, replaying every pause, every falter, every confession. Even seasoned journalists admitted they had not expected the magnitude of his revelation. Inside Rob's home, he watched the coverage with a mixture of apprehension and relief. Each segment reminded him of the weight he had carried in silence for decades. Yet it also confirmed that speaking out was necessary. He thought about his mother Estelle and his brother Lucas, and the unnamed friend whose death he had kept hidden for so long. They were gone, but acknowledging their impact publicly felt like honoring them, finally giving their memory the recognition it deserved. The grief didn't lessen, it never would, but sharing it, letting it breathe in the world, created a strange sense of freedom. Rob's phone began buzzing incessantly. Messages poured in from friends, family, and colleagues. Some expressed disbelief, some shared their own stories of loss, and many sent nothing but love and support. Billy Crystal's message was simple, yet profound. "You did it. You faced it. And the world finally sees you." Rob smiled faintly, tears forming again. He realized Billy had carried part of this burden alongside him, silently waiting for the moment when Rob could confront it himself. Later, his assistant brought in a stack of letters from fans. One in particular caught his attention. It was from a young filmmaker who wrote about losing both parents in a tragic accident and finding solace in Rob's films. "Your movies taught me to laugh, to dream, to keep going," the letter read. "Now knowing your truth, I understand that even heroes cry, and that's okay." Rob held the letter against his chest, a lump forming in his throat. It was proof that honesty could touch lives in ways that entertainment alone never could. By evening, Hollywood insiders began reacting. Colleagues posted messages of admiration, praising his courage and vulnerability. Some expressed surprise at the depth of Rob's private suffering, acknowledging that behind his public image lay a human being who had endured far more than anyone imagined. Even critics softened, noting that few people in Hollywood or anywhere could speak so candidly about grief without diminishing their legacy, yet not all reactions were kind. Rumors swirled that Rob's revelations could affect ongoing projects, contracts, and relationships within the industry. Some insiders whispered that revealing such personal tragedies might be perceived as a publicity stunt. Rob read the comments with a detached heart. He didn't do this for accolades or sympathy. He did it because the truth had to be told. As night fell, Rob stepped out onto his balcony, the city lights sparkling like distant stars. The world had heard his voice, seen his pain, and witnessed his humanity. He realized that the journey ahead of coping with public scrutiny, managing personal grief, and rebuilding connections would not be easy. But for the first time in years, he felt a fragile sense of hope. He whispered into the night, "I've survived loss before. I can survive this too." And for the first time, Rob Reiner truly believed it. The morning after the interview aired, Hollywood was still reeling. Studios buzzed with gossip, agents scrambled to gauge the impact on contracts, and fans flooded social media with emotional tributes and heartfelt messages. Yet the storm of attention wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. Rob Reiner knew that with honesty came both freedom and vulnerability. Suddenly, every loss he had carried in silence was out in the open, and the world was watching how he would bear it. Inside his home, Rob sat at the edge of his desk, staring at the same photographs he had kept for decades, his mother's warm smile, his brother Lucas frozen in a moment of joy, and the long-hidden image of his late friend whose passing had been a secret even to the public. The weight of exposure was crushing, yet it was strangely liberating. For years, he had hidden behind laughter, scripts, and film premieres, pretending that his grief didn't exist. Now, he had no choice but to face it fully. The phone rang constantly calls from family, friends, and journalists. Billy Crystal's voice was a constant thread of support, grounding him in the whirlwind. "You were right," Billy said softly during one call. Speaking out was the only way forward. People needed to see the real you. Rob exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. It was strange to be seen as both vulnerable and courageous at the same time. Despite the overwhelmingly supportive responses, not everyone reacted kindly. Industry insiders questioned the timing of his revelations, some even suggesting he was manipulating his public image to regain relevance. Rob read the critiques quietly, letting them pass through without letting them lodge in his mind. He reminded himself why he had done it, not for fame, not for sympathy, but because hiding the truth had only deepened the pain. Later, he received a call from a former co-star. The conversation was long and emotional, filled with tears and laughter as they reminisced about past projects and shared losses. For the first time in years, Rob felt connected rather than isolated. He realized that while grief had shaped his life, it hadn't defined his relationships entirely. Speaking openly had created an unexpected bridge between him and the people who mattered most. By evening, reporters arrived at his doorstep seeking follow-ups. But Rob was selective, agreeing only to brief statements. The experience was exhausting, but he knew it was necessary. His story, his real story, needed to be told fully without distortion. As night fell, he stepped onto his balcony, overlooking the city lights that seemed to pulse with energy and life. The streets were alive with people, unaware of the intimate pain and courage he had shared just hours earlier. He thought of the losses he had endured, the mother, the brother, the hidden friend, and whispered into the night, "I carry you with me always." The stars above shimmered like fragments of hope. And for the first time in decades, Rob allowed himself to feel a sense of peace amidst the chaos. The world had seen his grief, yet it had also seen his resilience. Rob understood that this was only the beginning. There would be more interviews, more scrutiny, and perhaps even criticism. But he was ready. Each tear shed, each confession spoken aloud, had prepared him for this moment. In revealing the truth, he had reclaimed control over his story. And for the first time in years, he could breathe freely. The day after Rob Reiner's final interview aired, Hollywood was in a frenzy. The industry hadn't seen anything like it in decades, a living legend exposing not just personal grief but decades of private struggle, fear, and hidden sorrow. Newsrooms ran continuous loops of his confessions. Social media exploded with reactions, and every corner of the entertainment world was abuzz with analysis. For some, it was inspiring. For others, uncomfortable. But for Rob, the impact was profoundly personal. Inside his home, Rob watched the coverage with a quiet intensity. Faces of friends, colleagues, and fans flashed across the screen, their voices trembling with empathy as they described the courage it took to finally speak. Some admitted they had no idea what he had endured. Others shared their own stories of loss, connecting his honesty to their healing. Rob felt a mixture of relief and vulnerability, a strange cocktail that left him exhausted yet oddly empowered. Speaking the truth had finally lifted some of the invisible weight he had carried for decades. But he knew it had also opened doors he hadn't anticipated. The phone rang incessantly. Calls from family, friends, and old collaborators filled his home, each bringing its own emotional charge. Billy Crystal's voice was steady and supportive, a tether in the chaos. People needed to see the real you, Billy reminded him. And now they have. Rob nodded, swallowing back tears, grateful for the friend who had silently guided him through his darkest hours. But not all responses were gentle. Some Hollywood insiders whispered criticisms, suggesting the revelations were timed to generate sympathy or revive his relevance. Others questioned whether personal grief should be publicized at all. Rob read the headlines silently, feeling their sting, but he refused to let them define his choice. He had spoken for himself, not for ratings or accolades. The truth, however painful, had to come out as evening fell. Rob stepped onto his balcony, the cool air brushing his face. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent to his personal story, yet breathtakingly alive. He reflected on the losses that had shaped him, his mother, his brother, the long-hidden friend, and felt their presence surrounding him, comforting rather than crushing. The act of sharing his pain had allowed him to honor them, not just in memory but in truth. Later, a close colleague visited, bringing old photographs and letters from past projects. Together, they reminisced, laughed, and shed tears, each memory a bridge connecting grief to joy. For Rob, it was a reminder that vulnerability could forge deeper connections than any career, milestone, or public accolade ever could dot by nightfall. Rob sat beneath the old oak tree in his backyard, the same tree under which he had written his first screenplay and pondered life's hardest questions. The shadows cast by the branches stretched long across the lawn, and he whispered softly, "I face the darkness, and now I face the world." The interview had opened wounds, yes, but it had also illuminated paths to healing. Rob Reiner understood now that this was more than a story of grief. It was a story of resilience, honesty, and courage. Speaking publicly had not only honored those he had lost, but had also allowed him to reclaim his own life. Hollywood, fans, and even critics would continue to talk, speculate, and analyze. But beneath the scrutiny and the headlines, Rob had found something priceless: the quiet, unshakable knowledge that he had finally, fully, and bravely been heard.